All right, so we're going to talk about speciation. How did we actually evolve to get different species? So we know that, or we think that humans evolved to have bigger brains and be smarter and better adapted. So humans can change over time, but still be humans. Um, Bears maybe kind of started to go in different directions. Like you have polar bears, grizzly bears, black bears. They're each adapted to their different environments, but they're still bears. And then you can have things totally become different species. Like maybe giraffes and zebras kind of started out together and then they really diverged, went in such different directions that they actually became different species. So we're going to talk about that as speciation. How did things get so different that they started to become different species? And one big part of that is isolation. So besides change, we needed kind of like the two different animals, the two different the giraffe and the zebra. We need them to have some sort of separation so that they can go in different directions and not interbreed and just become one kind of advanced animal. Um, so we have two different types of isolation. One is geographic isolation. We can develop species totally different more easily if they're actually physically separated by some sort of geographic barrier. It could be a mountain range. It could be the mountain lions on this side kind of developed more like bobcats, and this side, I don't know, you got more like coyotes, and you have kind of they're separated so they're able to evolve in different ways so they actually become different enough to be considered different species. They could be separated by a desert that's hard to cross, a river, a landslide. It could be on different islands, different continents. Okay. So they're not able to interbreed and mix and make one species. They end up making two different species because they are somehow physically, geographically separated. The other way is reproductive isolation. And this could start off geographic. Like maybe there was a desert that separated two animals and they developed differently. Then when the desert kind of wore away and they came together, they were so different that they physically couldn't reproduce together. Like their anatomy doesn't work together. They cannot do sexual reproduction together. So here's some examples of this. We have squirrel speciation due to geographic separation of the Grand Canyon. So on the south rim of the Grand Canyon, you had Harris's antelope squirrel. And on the north rim, you had the white-tailed antelope squirrel. And they really started to develop in different ways because they were physically separated. Maybe one thing was an advantage on this side, a different thing was an advantage on this side. So different things survived on the south rim as the north rim. They started to develop in different ways. And because they weren't mixed together, they couldn't reproduce to mix those genes. So they found maybe on one side of the mountain range, the climate changed. So those guys really had to evolve, and only the ones that were adapted to that new climate lived. So you saw a lot of change in that population, whereas on the other side, the climate stayed the same. So in that example, what's our physical geographic barrier? A mountain range. So I've switched from the squirrels. Now we're talking about just like an imaginary mountain range. What type of isolation is that geographic? Which one is going to change more? The one that had a bigger change in their climate. So which one is going to evolve into a new species first? Species A. And they're able to be a new separate species because they're separated. And now if you got them back together, say the mountains decline or they start to make their way up the mountains, and they're able to intermingle, but now their genes are so different and their physical anatomy is so different that they cannot reproduce together and they stay separate species. What type of isolation is that? Reproductive. So just to conclude, a single species can evolve over time to change, but we can also have speciation. We can have maybe an original ancestor that we all share develop in different direction to make humans and horses and zebra and giraffe and bears, because we had these different types of isolation, either geographic isolation, they were just in different places separated from each other, so they developed in different ways, or reproductive isolation, where even if they were near each other, like the bears and the squirrels aren't going to reproduce together and mix their genes because they are so different. They're not able to reproduce together. And the last thing is just how fast does this happen? Remember, rate means speed. So what is the rate of evolution? Well, the more stable the environment, the slower the rate of change, right? If you have like this really challenging environment, you're going to have a lot of survival of the fittest. Like only the best are going to survive. You're going to see a lot of changes. But like for humans right now, it's not that hard to survive as a human, although now we have all these coronavirus and stuff going on. But there is mostly food for everyone in the United States. We're not competing for food. We're not competing for shelter necessarily. Not competing for mates too much, like most people are able to find a mate. So we're not evolving that fast. If it were like really challenging and only the strongest and the smartest of us could survive, we might be evolving a little bit more fast. The rate of evolution can also be affected by how fast you reproduce and how quick your lifespan is. So like bacteria, viruses, insects, they're evolving right before our eyes, which can be scary, can be bad in some ways, because they reproduce like really fast and they make a lot of offspring and they do it really quickly. So you're going to see a lot of variation just in our lifetime. There's two ideas for the actual, like how the actual evolution occurs. And one is kind of that it happened really gradually over time. And one is that there were kind of big changes that happened like kind of interspersed. So the gradual over time one is called gradualism, that just slowly over time, those polar bears with the thicker soles of their feet had babies, then maybe the thickest ones survived, and then in their babies, the next generation, the thickest soles survived a little bit better. And over time, slowly, the soles of the feet just got thicker and thicker and thicker and thicker. And there's also, that's gradualism, that it just happened gradually over a very, very long time. And then there's this other idea of punctuated equilibrium, that like something happened and there was this big change and a lot of evolution happened all at once. Like all of a sudden, the peppered moths, the colors of the trees changed and became black, and now all of a sudden the black survives better. So there could be these kind of big changes that happen all at once, and then many years go by without change, and then a big change because of something that happened, or because of a new gene that was introduced by mutation. So which one of these is right, gradualism or punctuated equilibrium? Probably both. Probably gradual changes happen for some things, and then maybe all of a sudden there was a big change, and then maybe more gradual. Probably a combination of both, more for some things than others. What happens if a species cannot survive, it is not fit, it's not survival of the fittest, it's not fit to survive, we can experience extinction. Many species have become extinct over time. Many of them us humans had nothing to do with. But unfortunately, now we are changing the environment in such a way that like a lot of things are becoming extinct that wouldn't have otherwise if we didn't interfere and change the environment so that they are no longer fit. Okay, so just to conclude, how did we kind of develop in such different directions to get such different species on Earth, from a human to a tiger to an eel? You have to have some sort of isolation. Either those things are physically separated or they're reproductively separated. They cannot reproduce together. Evolution is change over time. How fast did that happen? Over many, many millions, sometimes billions of years. Sometimes gradually, sometimes a lot all at once.